And we're on the air with wire106, Season 2, Episode 6.
What's this one called? What's the title of this one?
All prologue.
All prologue. Which I'm not exactly sure what that means. And maybe we'll talk about it when we get to the end. But I'm not exactly sure, but I have an idea. Um, all right. So we watched this one without the sound last night. Imran, you were a part of that.
Yeah.
Paul, you too, myself. Um, just a quick kind of, throw out there. What was it like to watch this episode without sound? Any quick thoughts? Because we're focusing on visual this week. There's a little context. We did audio last week. We watched 3 episodes without visual, just with sound. This week we're going to watch 3 episodes just.
Um, I thought it was like last week it's like all audio, you could hear more. But this time it's like you like visualize and you have to see like what's going on, understand what's the scene that's happening, and see like for example, like I told you earlier about like the colors. I like realized like there's like color blue always.
Yeah, you pick up on some of that.
Yeah.
I personally found it was harder to focus. The sound had me far more focused in, and I could just put on the headphones and be locked in. When I had the screen going, I kind of drifted, thinking about other things, other episodes, other ideas, thinking between episodes, because I didn't have that sound to anchor me. So it was a lot more disorientating than actually just listening to the sound, interestingly enough.
Yeah, this kind of seems counterintuitive, because typically they say we get 80% of our information through our eyes. But when you take the sound out, yeah, it's like a lot less there. It's harder to pay attention. Um, and then like in sound, they say that, sound is like 70% of what you see. So,
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, for me, that was a really eye-opening moment to spend an hour with 10 or 11 other people thinking or trying to focus on an episode that had no sound. I found it really hard. Yeah, it's interesting. So, a lot to talk about in episode 6. I think it's one of the best episodes of the entire series, um, and I think for a couple of reasons. Um, one of the things I'll throw this out. One of the things I picked up on right away is you have two mirror parallel scenes in this episode between the one when you have the kind of the detail back together and they're all around this kind of seminar table talking about elements of Sabaka and the chase and what they're going after, which is paralleled later with D'Angelo in the prison talking about probably one of the greatest scenes in The Wire, The Great Gatsby, and how your fate is unavoidable and you just have to be who you are. There's no hiding behind it. Fate will come to get you. And I was interested. I didn't see that parallel until I watched it without the sound. And I was like, oh my God, there's a huge parallel there between the detail and between the prisoners. And the fact is the detail is talking about far more quotidian stuff. Herc is trying to hit on a Russell. You kind of get that eye movement. Like they're just kind of, that's almost like a bad class. And then you have this locked-in seminar in prison about the Great Gatsby, where D'Angelo is speaking truth to power. And there's such a weird kind of, dissonance between, the policeman doing good natural police work, which is kind of boring, in fact, and this unbelievably contemplative, thoughtful, existential treatise on the Great Gatsby and the inability to escape who you are. I just thought it was an interesting, a contrast.
yeah. Um, there was another thing. It didn't show up so much in the visual, but like watching the episode with the sound on, you have that scene with D'Angelo and his mom, and there's a scene later with Ziggy and Frank, his dad. You know, and in each case, they're like remembering things from way past, and sort of like throwing that in their parents' face.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting episode, or it's actually even interesting season about the generational dissonance between the opportunity that existed even 20 and 30 years ago and how that's completely gone. right? And that might not be so much the case in West Baltimore, but it's definitely the case in the docks and around the shores. Like there's this idea that there's a whole culture being lost with the kind of exporting of or the kind of mechanization of a whole industry. So there's this real sense of nostalgia in season two. And a lot of that is butt up against technology. I have a whole post I'm waiting to publish about the kind of constant referral back in season two to technology. And you have that amazing scene recently. I don't know if it's in this episode, it might be in episode 7 or 8, where you have the presentation about Rotterdam and about all the new brave technology that's changing the container industry and just how much, the writing is on the wall for Sabaka, that, he's part of a dying industry. And so it's interesting how much that nostalgia of the family and of possibility and of identity through work is linked to the development of technology. And I wonder if that's why Simon is pushing so hard on Ziggy and Nick, kind of confronting technology and having real no idea of it, but with this kind of backdrop of their job and their family's job and who they were is vanishing. And this is the new kind of infrastructure that you need to understand. So I'm compelled by that narrative.
Yeah. Yeah, the thing that I found most impressive about this episode is the Omar part of it in the court. I mean,
Omar's back.
Yeah, I agree.
That performance is.
it's you can put that up with the best moments in The Wire too, and particularly the way they set it up. Right, they set it up with him hanging across the table from a guard who's doing a crossword puzzle. Right, and he's looking for another word for the Greek word of the Greek term for God, right? The God of
God
war.
of War.
And he tries Mars, and that doesn't work, right? But it's actually Ares, and he knows that because of, I think it was middle school when they studied the Greek gods. And it's interesting how much that reinforces the tragedy that you'll see play out later on with Dee and the question of fate, and how much the Greek tragedies played into the framing more broadly of The Wire. So there's that on the side. But I'm with you 100%, Paul. The performance of him with the little tie, like doing that and giving the flaunt to Bird, and oh my God, it's just brilliant how he captures the jury and they're laughing, and he calls out Maury. He says, "I might use a shotgun. You use a briefcase, but we're not that different. It's all in the game, yo." Which is what Maury says to Orlando. You wanted to be in the game, now you're in the game. And it's finally like Maury got his comeuppance. So I agree. It was just magic. Amazing. And I mean, I also love, and you talk about it in your blog, Paul, the color. I think Amy Wallace talked about it last night in our kind of discussion, but the color, like he goes and he picks out this outfit. And they even spend some time talking about the outfit. And he looks at that one yellow outfit, and he says something about Buffy, like if my name was Buffy, or something like that. Like he makes a backhanded comment about, rich white culture, right?
Yeah.
And it's a really just kind of interesting moment when he comes with his kind of, over-the-top tie and his red jacket. It's just, it's a magical scene.
Yeah, and it just exudes this sort of like confidence in court that you wouldn't really expect, like.
Yeah. And it's
How
like,
can we believe what you have to say? It's like, well, that's on you. It's not up to me,
And the fact is, like, what's your profession? Like, steal from drug dealers, like, it's just, it must have been. It was such a surreal, like, his confidence with who he was, right? And his comfort with who he was and what he did, and no apologies about it. It's probably the reason that Omar's so likable, right?
Yeah.
Like, there's no apologies for what he's doing and how he's living, and he doesn't seem that different from people within the game who are legitimate. And Maury's feeding off that. He's feeding off his legitimacy. He's feeding off of his kind of institutional power. And Omar is completely resilient to it. And I think that's really empowering for a moment. It's just, he really makes you feel like, yes, someone can kind of, lift the veil for a second and show what it's all about. And in that way, Omar really is a Robin Hood. He really does live up to that. If not for a second, because like any other character, he's not a naturally good character. He's not someone you'd want to find yourself in a dark alley with. So it's kind of it's interesting to be rooting for him at the same time as he's probably one of the easiest characters in the series to like.
Yeah.
Especially for that scene when like Bird got sentenced to death for life, and then Melty and Omar were talking. I was expecting Omar to say Omar's back.
Yeah. Well, I love that part where he's flaunting, like he comes out and talks to Jimmy, and they're all like, "You guys are amazing," and Omar's just like, whatever. And then Bird walks back, and he starts taunting him again, like, I just think it's so like he's, it's this idea that like they're so far out on the edge of like what it means to be battling, and to see that happen in a different way in an institutional setting is kind of remarkable, right? Because it's as if the street came to the courts, but also the courts went to the street. Like, there's that weird moment where the courts don't feel like the courts anymore, right? And it seems something different. Like, Jimmy's going at it with Stringer, and Stringer knows it's over when Bird loses it, and he gets up and he leaves. And it's just this kind of unbelievable court, very much mirroring what we saw in episodes 1 and 13 of season 1. So it's actually, again, revisiting that. But this time, Judge Phelan doesn't seem like a complete jackass. It seems like actually justice is being served. It's a different kind of tone. And it may not be that, Baltimore's clean again and corruption is rooted out, but this one cold-blooded killer got sent to prison, even if Omar is not a legitimate witness, because he's not. I mean, that's the other thing. He's completely perjuring himself.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he's perjured himself, but they have other evidence that
Mm-hmm.
puts him there. They've got the gun, they've got the eyewitness, and then they've got Omar to back it up
But it's
with
still
his
an abrogation of
title.
justice.
Yeah.
It's not like the justice, like, Phelan,
Yeah.
that's not, he's lying under oath, right? He's
Yeah.
bald-faced lying.
Yeah. Yeah. And, Jimmy kind of brings that up with Stringer, too. Like,
Yeah,
yeah, that's the word on the street, but we're in a court of law,
exactly. The street doesn't apply here. And there's that interesting moment where the street, at least at this time, the law wins out. But even that is not it's a Pyrrhic victory, but it's not a pure victory, right?
Yeah.
Rules still had to be broken, compromises still had to be made. It was still, like everything, tainted.
Yeah.
Now, we have about 15, we're going to keep this to a half an hour, so we have about another 15, 16 minutes. And there's a few things we could probably talk about in this episode. And Imran, you gave me some screenshots. And Paul, I know you did some blogs, so you talked about a couple. You guys want to do a quick screenshot blitz and look at some of the visuals we've picked out in this episode, and then maybe we'll do that for about 5 or 7 minutes, and then spend the last 5 or 7 minutes talking about D.
Yeah. Okay.
Does that make sense?
All right.
Okay, so what I'll do, Imran, is I'll grab your images now, and I'll pull them up, and then we can go from there. So let me try it. And let me do this. This will be easier. All right. All right. Hold on. Hold on, chat. Open. And then let's see. All right, let's try this. So here's your first one out. Here's your first one, Imran.
Oh
You
yeah,
see that?
yeah.
There we go.
Was it like?
I chose that picture. Like with that particular scene is like like I told you it's the color blue because like I see like our violet or blue right there, and then
Yeah,
and there's like he's with Bunk and Russell, and there's that there's that funny scene of when Bunk like he threw the tennis ball and hits him Lester in the head later on.
yeah, that is a great scene.
But yeah, that scene I chose it like like throughout the episode like mostly that just caught my attention is like the color blue, and I'm like thinking like probably the reason why they chose that color blue is because like you know probably it symbolized like like calm, easy or something soft, and Lester can be calm sometimes.
Yeah, and it's interesting too. I mean, one of the things that comes through in this is um, the computer screen is part of that blue that's framing his eyes, right?
Yeah.
And that's a blue. That image of that blue comes through a lot, and that's one of the readings I have for the technology, right? Like that shows up a lot and somewhat regularly that you have this technology kind of framing out, how people see and what they see. Because the only way they can really see the corruption now is not through cameras. It's not through wiretaps, although they're getting some to that. It's through technology, which is interesting. And that's computers in particular. So everything is technology. I don't want to pretend it's not. Um, so here's another scene with the Greek. What about this one?
Oh yeah. I remember like, when I was watching this last night, and when Nick came in, like I thought they're gonna be like another conversation about something, like like trading and stuff. And then when I saw like another thing, all the colors they're wearing is like similar to each other. Like why? Like,
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
we're all on the
interesting.
same team.
Yeah, it's interesting. And the fact is the colors, like in the courtroom or here, they're so much more dull, at least at the close, versus, say, in the towers or in the pit. Very different sense of style and kind of allure. And you get that with the containers at the dock and with their kind of, their vests for security reasons, but you don't get it with the clothing. And it's interesting how Omar's clothing stands out so much in the courtroom. Even Bird, doesn't look himself, right? Because he's playing the game, right? He's part of the game. And
Yeah.
so it's interesting how the clothing in this season, and Maggie's talked a lot about clothing in this particular show, and this is an interesting moment where the clothing is so different. Yeah, I totally agree. Let me go to your next one, Imran. This is going to be, well, speaking of clothing, right? This is going to be our main man. Everybody loves Omar. So here's Omar in the courtroom, or actually coming out of the courtroom.
oh yeah, that scene I just chose that because because like you see the title like Omar's back. Is one of his. I hope he said that.
Didn't someone say last night during the listen along that that might be an allusion to what happens um, to D as well?
I think yeah.
Like with the tie around his neck
Oh
and
yeah.
that like a noose. And so it's interesting that someone brought that up. I forgot who brought it up, but someone mentioned that last night, and I found that pretty interesting. That talk about this notion of a noose that happens later on in the episode with D'Angelo, and you see Omar sporting his own uh, you know, sporty noose. Here's another one, Omar and Fallon.
Yeah.
What about this one?
I remember when I started watching like this particular scene when Omar comes in, like their usual room, like it's like all like dark or gray or colors, and Omar is like he just brightened up the place, like everyone's looking at Omar.
Yeah, and that jacket. That jacket is awesome. I really do dig that jacket. Uh, so let's find. We got another one. We got this one is. Well, that's the fourth one. This is the last one. This is the crew. So we'll open this, and this is actually one that actually you shared too, Paul. So this is actually going to be interesting. You both might have something to say about this one.
Yeah.
What? Why'd you share it, Emily?
Well, I thought like like in the usual like those type of meetings like Like they would be like in the work clothes, like, and like now they're like all different colors, like they're like about to go out or something.
Well, it's interesting, like how colorful they are in some ways. Like you do get more colorful clothing here, and you also have that old school nostalgic wood paneling that I mentioned last night during the watching that I love. Like this seems like a room out of the '80s or '70s. It is so outside of time.
Yeah, the rainbow.
Yeah,
Yeah. And that floor with the concentric squares, it's like a target. You know, we saw it earlier with Sabatka standing in the middle of it in one of the early episodes, and here the whole Union is
yeah,
in the target. The other thing that I noticed about it, it's like it's slightly tilted.
yeah.
You know,
Telling you, another thing that's a real kind of almost a historical moment in these, and you see it in a number of times in season 1 and 2 of The Wire, is those American flags, which are about 16 by 10 or whatever. And you see one on the very back here in the corkboard, right, at the way back. Those were all over the place after 9/11 as a sign of solidarity. They were on cars, they were on house windows, they were everywhere. I was in Brooklyn at the time when 9/11 happened, and there was one of those flags everywhere on every car, and it was this real sign that America needs to pull together in light of the kind of terrorist attacks. And it's interesting how you'll see them if you watch closely in this episode and the previous episode and in future episodes. They're everywhere. They're scattered like in not every episode, but regularly enough that you'll see them on cars, you'll see them in windows, you'll see them back here, and they're hidden in the composition, but they're there. And I have to think that's another ongoing critique that Simon's making about 9/11 and the politics post 9/11 with Homeland Security and all that. So it's interesting if you kind of look for them. It'd be interesting to find every single one of those flags in The Wire. I think that would be a very interesting project
yeah.
because they're everywhere. They are. Awesome. Am I missing anything, Imran? Was that everything that you had shared with me? I think there might be one more, so let me see.
I, I don't remember from the top of my head right now, but
Yeah, I think I'm good enough to say that is it. How about you, Paul?
Let's see. I've got this picture. Showing the crew standing around or sitting around the table discussing the case. And if you look in the background there, you can see Sabaka's picture like pinned right to the corkboard, almost in the middle of the screen. It's sort of like a way of bringing him into the scene even though he's not actually there. Like you can see what they're talking about. I thought that was like a great use of the background to
Yeah.
build the story together.
It also brings up an interesting point, at least for me, is, the corkboard and this detail is never as compelling as the Avon Barksdale one. There's a lot of compelling things happening in the season, but these criminals are not nearly as smart as Barksdale. They give out their numbers, they call when there's a bad delivery, they call the big boss. It takes them about, 2 days to get on the big boss. It takes them no time to figure out where they're pulling those containers and where they're sending them. I mean, it's a layup. It's like there's no challenge to it. In the first season, it was all about like building up to the challenge. And in this season, by season episode 8 or 9, it's all figured out. It's just a matter of going through the kind of through the paces. And so it's interesting how much less sophisticated Sabaka and his crew, and even the Greeks are, compared to Barksdale and his crew.
Yeah.
I'm interested in that.
Well, I mean, Herc brought that up. I think it was in the first episode when he was talking to Kima.
Yeah, exactly.
I love these white boys. They're so stupid.
Yeah, exactly. It's true. So, and it kind of plays through, and you see it in TV season 2, and it's like there are other compelling elements of it, but certainly not the detail, because it's a pretty run-of-the-mill detail, and they're pretty stupid. And Sabaka is always out of his depth. He's always out of his depth because he's in over his head. It's part
Yeah.
of the reality. Um, okay, good. Let's turn. Anything else, Paul?
Um, no, we can go.
Well, you may have something on this anyway. Let's turn a bit to the ending of this, to talking about the Gatsby moment, and then talking about the murder of Dee.
Yeah.
You blogged a bit about it. You did the epigraph, Paul, with
Yeah.
Richard Price and D'Angelo talking about quoting Gatsby. What'd you make of that scene? I just like to hear your take on it.
Um, it's interesting, like you said earlier, to see a crew of people in prison, like discussing classic literature at such a high level. um, but on the other hand, they've got nothing but time there. So
Yeah,
yeah, um, he Richard Price was the guy leading the discussion, and he brought up the statement that there are no second acts in American lives. Um, I'm thinking that goes to the all prologue thing.
yeah,
Um, and I guess it says something about D'Angelo too. But he brought up the idea that Gatsby's trying to pretend he's something he's not, but he can't because what he is always with him.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and it also, for me, what I really love about that scene is it reinvokes the scene in the restaurant when really D'Angelo struggles over who he is in this world and in this space of wealth, and not just of race, right, but of questions of wealth and power and how they might know who he is, and kind of reflecting him and how he spends time on his clothes and how he looks. And if you read The Gatsby, so much of that is about the clothes and who he is and how he's reflected. And you think about D'Angelo as a very unlikely Gatsby figure, but at the same time, it fits in this whole kind of vision, I think, of D'Angelo as the kind of existential protagonist of this show that you don't really get with Jimmy, or you don't really get with Bump, or with even with Freeman, because they're in the loving arms of the right side of the law, right? It's someone who's really on the outside, but yet struggling, like Wallace, who's unfortunately killed, or like D'Angelo, that I think that really frames for me one of the most compelling characters in the season. And the all prologue to me always struck like, in order to understand The Wire or to understand where everything's going to go in Baltimore, it all had to move to this point of death. Not only just for Wallace, but to this point for D'Angelo. I mean, this really does point to the end of one character who's crucial to the show, and suggesting that the show will go on, right? People like Jimmy now are becoming secondary characters, almost comic characters, right? They're not even that important. And it's with this moment, the prologue, that some of the ideas that this is going to be a consistent narrative with a few players starts to die here. So with the death of not only Wallace, where we realize that, but particularly with Dee, who really starts the show, like, who's the focus of the whole investigation, he's gone. And the whole prologue for what's to come and for the real characters of the show, the city of Baltimore, to emerge, you have to let go of, what is potentially one of my favorite characters, just for his depth of vision, of kind of struggle, of trying to break free and be someone in a world where he does feel the real limits of where he can go and who he can be. And I think it's what's most human about The Wire, is to struggle against those limits, to know they exist, to know they're reinforced by institutions, by wealth, by race, by class, by gender, but to still struggle against them is the hope, right? Like D'Angelo in some ways is the hope. Like Gatsby in some ways is the hope. And so I really found this such a brilliant scene to kind of, capstone D'Angelo's, real presence in this series, but then to see him go, because that's what happens, right? At the end,
Yeah.
he's strangled on a contract from Stringer, which is complicated, but so happens.
Yeah. He talks about the Gatsby fronting, trying to pretend he's something he's not. And you can kind of see that in D'Angelo too, like you said, in his wardrobe. He's got that whole style he's putting on. But even in that, career, that life, he said he didn't belong there.
Yeah.
And that kind of showed. And, he said, I think it was towards the end of the first season, that the only time he felt free was when he was in prison.
And it's interesting too because in Gatsby there's this whole underworld, right? There's Wolfshine who uh, potentially rigged the World Series in what was it, 1919 or thereabouts, the Black Sox, and there's this whole underworld that Gatsby's a part of. The fact that he might have killed a man, right? The fact that you don't really know where he's from, which is kind of what his girlfriend in the restaurant reinforced. Like in America, it doesn't matter as long as you have money. And that, when she said that, it really did invoke Gatsby. And it's funny that D'Angelo at the end is refuting it. He's saying, in fact, that's not what it's all about. Like, there's this real sense of person, of identity that is at the core. That it seems like at the moment of his death, D'Angelo was really starting to emerge into. He was refusing the world and the life of his uncle. He was refusing his mom, right? He was refusing everything that was defining him as, a Gatsby-like character. And at the same time, it's when he has to die. If you think about it in that way, it's also a very tragic vision of trying to be or trying to break out of where you come from and who you're supposed to be. So there's that too. But
yeah. There's no way out of the game alive. Yeah.
Yeah, it's right. It's rigged, right? The game is rigged.
Yeah.
So, sorry, Imran, I know we're talking. I get very passionate about this scene. Have you read The Gatsby, Imran?
I don't think so. I have read it. So.
Yeah, well, highly recommended. And it kind of, people say maybe the best novel written, best American novel ever written, and I think there's some power to that. But, it gets at, I think, some of the deeper thoughts around this question of fate. But what's interesting is, did you see the recent re-release of Gatsby? Of a movie? The movie, Gatsby? Well, it's kind of like a hip-hop Gatsby, which I'm interested in. It's directed, the music, the parties, kind of very Jay-Z, I think, produced it. And so it was interesting that Gatsby, just 2 years ago, would be kind of conceptualized as this pop culture, hip-hop image and film that was pretty successful. It was an interesting film. I went to see it. I don't know if I liked it, but I thought it was an interesting take on Gatsby. And this actually compelling touchback to Gatsby in a prison in Baltimore in 2003, right, or whenever it's supposed to be. So I'm interested in how Gatsby, as this iconic American jazz age novel, is still resonating and still as powerful for D in prison, and maybe for Jay-Z as a hip-hop star in 2012, as it might have been back in the day when it was considered, a kind of masterpiece of literature. I think that's an interesting thing to think about masterpieces. And I want to believe that Simon is thinking about masterpieces a lot when he's doing The Wire. Because I think they knew, and it sounds like when we talk with Jen, and it sounds like that they were making a masterpiece of television. Right? I think the idea of masterpiece is embedded here. Right? Like there's a sense of it. Like you don't pull out things like Gatsby loosely. And when you do, it's so easy to go wrong. Right? It's when a really bad show or a really bad piece of work tries to pull in another classic, it's a surefire sign that it's a complete flop. And this wasn't. And I think that's really interesting to me. Yeah, anyway.
Well, yeah, there's a depth and a breadth to what's going on in The Wire that it's all very deliberate and planned, and everything's for a purpose. All the pieces matter. Um, yeah, he must have known that he really had something going here.
Yeah, and you also realize when you talk to someone like Jen Ralston, and it really resonated with students. I could see when they did their reviews last week, just what she was saying and her way of thinking about audio, and just how you know a masterpiece like this in television isn't just about David Simon. I mean, he may be the one, and Ed Burns. They may be the ones who are writing and framing the narratives, but it depends upon. I mean, it's a hard thing to happen, right? It depends upon potentially scores of people coming around in their respective um, expertise and bringing it all together into one whole masterpiece that runs 4 seasons and maybe 5 if you consider the 5th season part of that. But it really is a magical thing, to see that kind of come together and sustain it. Now we're 21 episodes in, or 20 episodes in, and it's going right. I mean, it's continuing to compel. And last night's watch along was a perfect example of that.
Yeah.
All right, I have to run.
All right.
Big fans.
Yeah.
Big
All
fans.
right. Let's see.
wire106.
And where'd
We're
my
out.
stuff go?
Okay. I'm going to get up the audio shows from last week. I never got those. So I'll get them up this week, and I will need to go, and I'll catch up. Paul, if you send me the link for this, I'll post it.
Yeah, I'm looking for the stop broadcast button, but it's gone.
Is it?
Yeah, interesting. Well, I'll just hang up on it and see what happens.
See what happens.
All right.
All right, guys. Bye-bye.
All right.